Up until now, we've been referring to such equations as linear equations. We call such equations linear equations because when the solutions of such an equation are plotted on a graph, we get a line that is linear, which means it is a straight line. That is something we can see here. We get a straight line when we plot this equation, and that is why we call this a linear equation. Now, a natural question that arises here is that can we have equations whose solutions, when plotted on a graph, give us a non-linear line? Well, the answer to that is simply yes. We can have equations whose solutions, when plotted on a graph, give us a non-linear curve or a non-linear line. Let us have a look at such equations. Here we have this equation y equals x square plus 2. This equation is also in two variables. I have x and y. The only difference is that here the highest power of the independent variable is 2, as opposed to a linear equation, let's say y equals x plus 2. Here the power of our independent variable was simply 1, right? And you can go back to all the previous examples of linear equations we've dealt with. The highest power was 1, but here we have the highest power as 2. Now let us see how the graph of such an equation looks like. Here we've plotted this equation, and you can see that the line that we get after plotting the solution of such an equation is not a straight line. In fact, it is a curve, and that is how the solutions of such an equation look like. Such an equation where her highest power is 2 as opposed to 1 is known as a quadratic equation. So this is called as a quadratic equation, and we can clearly see that the graph of such an equation is not a straight line but a curve of this nature. We can have other equations such as this one, y equals x cube plus 2. Here the highest power is 3, and we call such equations as cubic equations. Now if we look at the graph of such an equation, we get a curve of this nature. Now this is a very weird looking curve, much different from the curve of a quadratic equation and very different from the straight line we get in the case of a linear equation. So you can see, depending on the highest power of the independent variable, we have different names: cubic for 3, quadratic for 2, and linear for 1. And also we have the solutions when plotted on a graph sheet look very different. Here we get a curve of this nature, in quadratic we get a curve of this nature, and in linear equations we get a simple straight line. Now all you need to know is that why we call this type of an equation a linear equation, and how this type of an equation is different from other equations, quadratic or cubic